Her twins were sold by her evil mom to an infertile billionaire. Years later, she received a shocking call. The billionaire, now filled with guilt, reveals that her children, now young, are desperately searching for her. They've lived in luxury, but something is missing. The reunion is about to happen, but when the twins finally meet their biological mother, the truth comes crashing down. The billionaire's past, the pain of separation, and the scars they all carry are more tangled than anyone ever imagined. Will she be able to rebuild what was lost? Or is it already too late for healing? What happens when the past, filled with betrayal, catches up with the future? Can love mend the pieces of a broken family, or will the truth shatter them for good? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now, and if this story speaks to you, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The hospital room was quiet, except for the steady beeping of monitors and the soft whimpers of newborn twins. Amelia lay exhausted in the hospital bed, her dark hair damp with sweat, as she cradled her precious babies, one in each arm. Aiden and Ava, just hours old, were perfect in every way. Their tiny fingers curled around her own as they slept peacefully, unaware of the turmoil in their mother's heart. "They're beautiful," Amelia whispered, tears rolling down her cheeks. She traced Aiden's delicate features with her finger, then Ava's, memorizing every detail of their innocent faces. The joy of holding her children was overwhelming, but so was the crushing weight of responsibility. The reality of her situation pressed heavily upon her. At 22 years old, she had no job, no savings, and no support from the twins' father who had disappeared the moment she told him she was pregnant. The small apartment she could barely afford was no place for two babies. "What am I going to do?" she murmured, her voice trembling. As if on cue, her mother swept into the room, her designer handbag swinging from her arm. "Oh, darling," she said, her voice dripping with a mixture of sympathy and judgment. "They're lovely, but you know you can't keep them." Amelia's grip on her babies tightened instinctively. "Mum, please, not now." "When then, Amelia? When you're living on the street? When you can't afford to feed them?" Her mother perched on the edge of the hospital bed, reaching out to stroke Ava's cheek. "I've been talking to Theodore Barrington. You remember him from the country club?" Amelia nodded weakly. Everyone knew Theodore Barrington, the billionaire businessman whose infertility had been gossip fodder among the country club set. Her mother had worked as his executive assistant for years. He and his wife have been trying to have children for years. Her mother continued, her voice soft but insistent. "They have so much love to give, Amelia. And more importantly, they have resources. The twins would want for nothing." "They're my babies," Amelia protested, but her voice lacked conviction. The doubt had already taken root. Over the next few weeks, as Amelia struggled with sleepless nights and endless diaper changes in her tiny apartment, her mother's words echoed in her mind. Every time she had to choose between buying formula or paying her electric bill, every time both babies cried simultaneously and she didn't have enough arms to comfort them both, the weight of her inadequacy grew heavier. Her mother visited daily, always with the same message. "Think of what's best for them, darling. They deserve better than this." One particularly difficult night, when Aiden was running a slight fever and Ava wouldn't stop crying, Amelia reached her breaking point. She sat on her worn second-hand couch, tears streaming down her face, and called her mother. "I'll talk to Theodore," she whispered into the phone. The meeting was arranged for the following day. Theodore Barrington arrived at her apartment in an expensive suit that probably cost more than her rent. Despite his wealth and status, his eyes were kind as he looked at the twins. "They will want for nothing," he promised, his voice gentle. "The best schools, the best opportunities, everything they could ever need or want. and you can rest easy knowing they're safe and cared for." Amelia's hands shook as she signed the adoption papers. Each stroke of the pen felt like a knife in her heart, but she forced herself to think of her baby's future, of warm beds and full bellies, of college funds and endless possibilities. The day they took the twins away was the hardest of her life. She held them one last time, breathing in their sweet baby smell, memorizing the weight of them in her arms. "I love you both so much," she whispered, her tears falling onto their tiny faces. "I'm doing this because I love you. Please understand that someday." Aidan made a small cooing sound, while Ava slept peacefully, unaware that everything was about to change. When Theodore's wife came to collect them, Amelia felt as though her heart was being torn from her chest. She watched from her window as the expensive black car drove away with her precious cargo. Her knees gave out and she collapsed to the floor, gut-wrenching sobs racking her body. Her mother stood behind her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You did the right thing," her mother said firmly. "They'll have the life you could never give them." But as Amelia curled into herself on the floor of her empty apartment, surrounded by abandoned baby items and the lingering scent of her children, she wondered if doing the right thing would always feel this wrong. The silence was deafening. No more crying, no more cooing, no more tiny heartbeats against her chest. Just emptiness and an ache so deep she wasn't sure it would ever heal. That night, she lay in her bed, clutching the twins' baby blankets, breathing in their fading scent and trying to convince herself that her mother was right. That, somewhere in a mansion across town, her babies were being tucked into expensive cribs, their futures secure. But it didn't stop the tears from coming, didn't ease the physical pain of her arms aching to hold them. She thought of all the firsts she would miss. First steps, first words, first day of school. Would they wonder about her? Would they hate her for giving them up? Would they understand that she did it out of love, not because she didn't want them? The days that followed were a blur of grief and emptiness. She packed away the baby clothes and toys, each item a reminder of what she'd lost. Her mother tried to convince her to sell them, but she couldn't bear to part with these last tangible connections to her children. Instead, she carefully stored everything in boxes, marking each one with their names, Aidan and Ava, and tucked them away in her closet like the pieces of her heart she was trying to hide. The noise of the city continued outside her window. Cars honking, people laughing, life going on as if her world hadn't just shattered into a million pieces. But inside her apartment, time seemed to stand still. Every corner held a memory. The spot where she'd rocked them to sleep, the changing table where she'd sung them lullabies, the window seat where she'd watched the sunrise while feeding them. At night, she would wake up thinking she heard them crying, only to remember they were gone. The phantom sounds of their needs haunted her, making the silence that followed even more unbearable. She kept their hospital bracelets in her bedside drawer, taking them out sometimes just to run her fingers over their tiny names, proof that they had been real, that they had been hers, if only for a little while. Work colleagues and acquaintances, not knowing the full story, would ask about the twins. Each time, she had to swallow back tears and simply say they were being cared for by someone else. The pitying looks and judgmental whispers followed her everywhere, but none of it compared to the judgment she placed on herself. Her mother's visits became less frequent, as if now that the problem was solved, there was no need to check on her daughter's welfare. When she did visit, she spoke of Theodore Barrington's generosity, of how the twins would have every advantage in life, of how Amelia could now focus on her own future. But Amelia's future felt meaningless without her children in it. Each night, before she went to bed, she would look at the only photo she had kept, a simple snapshot taken in the hospital of her holding both babies, tired but smiling. "I love you," she would whisper to their tiny faces. "I hope someday you'll understand. I hope someday you'll forgive me." The weeks following the twins' departure blurred together like watercolors in the rain. Amelia moved through her days like a ghost, going through the motions of living without really being present. Her small apartment, once filled with the sounds of baby coos and cries, now echoed with an emptiness that seemed to grow larger with each passing day. Every morning, she would wake up and reach instinctively for her babies before reality crashed over her like a cold wave. The routine of getting ready for work, which had once been a chaotic juggling act with 2 infants, was now painfully simple. She found herself staring at the clock, knowing exactly what she would have been doing with the twins at any given moment. Their feeding times, their nap schedule, the quiet moments when they would just look up at her with those innocent eyes. At work, Amelia threw herself into her tasks with desperate intensity, hoping to drown out her thoughts in spreadsheets and meetings. Her colleagues noticed the change in her, the dark circles under her eyes, the way her smile never quite reached them anymore. Some tried to ask about the twins, but she'd developed a standard response that kept them at bay. "They're being well cared for." The words tasted like ash in her mouth every time. Her mother's visits became a source of both comfort and torment. She would sweep in, immaculately dressed as always, bearing news of the twins like precious gifts she was bestowing upon her daughter. "Theodore has hired the best nanny money can buy," her mother announced during one such visit, stirring her tea with precision. "The twins have a nursery that looks like something out of a magazine. Really, Amelia, you should be grateful. They want for nothing." Amelia sat across from her, fingers wrapped tightly around her own cup. "Are they happy?" she asked, the question that burned in her heart day and night. Her mother waved dismissively. "Of course they're happy. They're too young to know any different, and they're thriving. Theodore says Aiden is already trying to roll over, and Ava's starting to show real personality." Each detail was like a knife to Amelia's heart, precious milestones she should have witnessed herself. She tried to picture her babies in their luxury nursery, surrounded by expensive toys and professional caregivers. The image should have brought comfort, but instead, it made her ache with longing. The nights were the hardest. In the quiet darkness, doubt crept in like a thief, stealing what little peace she managed to find during the day. She would lie awake, wondering if she'd made the biggest mistake of her life. Her mother's voice would echo in her head, reminding her of all the practical reasons why giving up the twins was the right thing to do. But what about love? What about the bond between a mother and her children? Sometimes she would take out the box of their things she'd hidden away. Each tiny sock, each soft onesie, held memories that threatened to overwhelm her. She had kept one of each of their first outfits, and sometimes she would hold them close, trying to remember how it felt to hold her babies. The financial security she was supposed to feel now that she wasn't supporting 2 infants felt hollow. Yes, her bank account was more stable, but the cost had been too high. She started putting away money each month in a separate account, marking it for A&A, though she wasn't sure if she'd ever have the chance to give it to them. Her mother continued to drop by, always with updates about the twins' life with Theodore. "They've started baby swimming lessons," she'd say, or "Theodore's having a music room built just for them." Each new detail was meant to reassure Amelia, but instead made her feel more distant from her children's lives. One particularly difficult evening, after her mother had left, Amelia found herself looking at real estate listings in Theodore's neighborhood. She knew it was probably unhealthy, but she couldn't help wondering if she might catch a glimpse of them someday, in a park, at a store, anywhere. The thought of them growing up so close yet so far away was almost unbearable. Time continued its relentless march forward. Seasons changed, and with them came new challenges. The first Christmas without the twins was especially difficult. Amelia saw happy families everywhere she looked, parents shopping with their children, holiday cards featuring smiling babies in festive outfits. She wondered if Theodore was taking pictures of the twins with Santa, if they were too young to understand the magic of the season. Her mother tried to help in her own way, bringing news that Theodore had imported a massive Christmas tree and hired decorators to create a winter wonderland for the twins. "They'll never want for anything," she repeated, her standard reassurance. "Theodore even set up trust funds for both of them. Their futures are secure." But security wasn't the same as love, Amelia thought to herself. All the money in the world couldn't replace a mother's touch, a mother's heart. Yet she continued to tell herself that her sacrifice was worth it, that her children would have opportunities she could never provide. It became a mantra she repeated when the guilt threatened to overwhelm her. Each milestone she missed was carefully recorded in a journal she kept hidden away with their baby things. First smiles, first laughs, first solid foods, all experienced by strangers while she could only imagine these precious moments. The journal became both a torture device and a lifeline, a way to feel connected to her children's lives even as she remained separated from them. Spring arrived, bringing with it new life and growth that seemed to mock Amelia's loss. She watched young mothers in the park with their babies, remembering how she had dreamed of taking the twins for walks in their double stroller. Instead, she hurried past, keeping her head down, trying to avoid the sight of what she had given up. Her mother's updates continued, each one a bitter reminder of the life her children were living without her. "They're crawling now," she'd say, or, "They've started babbling. Theodore thinks Aidan might say his first word soon." Amelia would smile and nod, storing away each detail like precious gems, even as they cut her heart to pieces. The grief didn't lessen with time as everyone said it would. Instead, it transformed, becoming a constant companion that colored every aspect of her life. She found herself categorizing time as before and after, before the twins were born, after she gave them up. Everything in between felt like a dream she couldn't quite remember clearly, though the pain remained sharp and real. Time became a blur of endless workdays and sleepless nights for Amelia. She had thrown herself into her job at the local accounting firm, taking on extra projects and volunteering for overtime whenever possible. Her desk calendar was filled with numbers and deadlines instead of the baby milestones she should have been tracking. Every morning she arrived early, coffee in hand, desperate to lose herself in spreadsheets and tax forms. Her co-workers had stopped asking about the twins months ago, sensing the raw pain that lingered beneath her practiced smile. They watched as she buried herself in work, staying late into the evening when others had gone home to their families. The office became her sanctuary, a place where the emptiness felt almost professional rather than personal. On this particular afternoon, Amelia was deep in concentration, reconciling a particularly complex set of accounts. The familiar rhythm of numbers helped quiet the constant ache in her chest. The office hummed with the usual sounds, keyboards clicking, phones ringing, the soft whir of the copy machine down the hall. When her phone buzzed, she almost ignored it, assuming it was another routine client call. But something made her glance at the screen, an unknown number with the area code from the wealthy part of town where Theodore lived. Her heart skipped a beat, but she forced herself to remain calm as she answered. "Hello, is this Amelia Bennett?" The voice was crisp and professional, belonging to a woman who introduced herself as Sarah Matthews, Theodore Barrington's personal assistant. "Yes, this is she," Amelia replied, her fingers gripping the edge of her desk so tightly her knuckles turned white. "Ms. Bennett, I'm calling on behalf of Mr. Barrington regarding Aidan and Ava." Sarah's voice softened slightly as she mentioned the twins' names. "There have been some developments that Mr. Barrington feels need to be addressed." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Amelia's throat went dry, and she struggled to find her voice. Are they okay? They're physically healthy," Sarah assured her quickly. "But there have been some emotional challenges. The twins are becoming increasingly curious about their origins. They've been asking questions that Mr. Barrington feels only you can answer." Amelia listened as Sarah explained how Theodore had been struggling to handle the situation. The twins, now 11 months old, were showing signs of distress that their caretakers couldn't soothe. They would cry for hours, reaching for photos of women who resembled Amelia, showing a deep, instinctive need for maternal connection that no amount of expensive toys or professional care could satisfy. "Mr. Barrington," Sarah paused, choosing her words carefully. "He's been deeply affected by this situation. He's barely sleeping, barely eating. The guilt is consuming him, Ms. Bennett. He believes he made a terrible mistake in keeping you separated from the children." Amelia's hand trembled as she reached for her water bottle. "What exactly is he asking for?" "He would like you to come to the house, to meet with him first, and then, if you're willing, to see the twins. He believes it's crucial for their emotional well-being." Sarah's voice became gentler. "He wants to make things right." The words Amelia had dreamed of hearing for months now seemed almost too good to be true. Her heart raced as conflicting emotions warred within her, hope, fear, excitement, and terror all battling for dominance. "When?" The word came out as barely more than a whisper. "Mr. Barrington would like to meet with you tomorrow afternoon, if possible. He understands this is sudden, but he feels the situation is urgent." Sarah provided the address. Not that Amelia needed it. She had memorized it months ago, though she'd never dared to drive past. After ending the call, Amelia sat motionless at her desk, her mind spinning with possibilities. Her hands shook as she gathered her things, mumbling something about a family emergency to her supervisor. The drive home passed in a blur, her thoughts consumed by images of her babies. Not really babies anymore. She realized with a pang. They would be walking soon if they weren't already. At home, she pulled out the box of their things, something she hadn't done in weeks. The tiny outfits seemed impossibly small now. Would they remember her scent? Her voice? The way she used to sing to them? Probably not, she thought with a wave of sadness. But maybe, just maybe, there was still some primal connection, some bond that explained their current distress. That night, sleep eluded her completely. She tried on and discarded countless outfits, wanting to look perfect but not too perfect, professional but approachable. She practiced what she might say to Theodore, to the twins' nannies, to the twins themselves. Every scenario she imagined ended differently, some wonderful, some heartbreaking. By morning, dark circles ringed her eyes, but she barely noticed. She called in sick to work for the first time in months, spent an hour doing and redoing her makeup, and finally settled on a simple blue dress that brought out her eyes that Ava had inherited, according to her mother's updates. As she drove toward Theodore's address, her hands were steady on the wheel even as her heart thundered in her chest. This could change everything, she knew, or it could break her heart all over again. But for the chance to see her children, to maybe be part of their lives in some way, she would risk anything. The gates of Theodore's estate loomed before her, ornate and intimidating. As she announced herself through the intercom, she took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and prepared to face whatever came next. The gate swung open, inviting her into a world she had only imagined, the world where her children had spent the first year of their lives. Sarah met her at the front door, her professional demeanor softened by genuine sympathy. "Mr. Barrington is waiting in his study," she said, leading Amelia through the massive house. "He wanted to speak with you privately before any decisions are made about seeing the twins." With each step down the luxurious hallway, Amelia's heart beat faster. Somewhere in this house, her babies were playing, learning, growing. So close, yet still out of reach. She followed Sarah toward what would surely be one of the most important conversations of her life, praying she would have the strength to handle whatever came next. The mahogany double doors of Theodore Barrington's study opened with a soft creak, revealing a room that perfectly embodied old-world wealth. Amelia's eyes swept across floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, leather-bound volumes, and an imposing desk that dominated the space. The afternoon sun streamed through tall windows, casting long shadows across the Persian rug. Theodore stood as she entered, and Amelia was struck by how different he looked from the confident billionaire she remembered. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his normally pristine suit appeared slightly rumpled. He seemed to have aged years in the months since she'd last seen him. "Miss Bennet," he said, his voice carrying a weight she hadn't expected. "Thank you for coming. Please, sit down." He gestured to a plush leather chair across from his desk. Amelia lowered herself into the chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap to hide their trembling. The air felt thick with unspoken words and shared regret. "Would you like something to drink?" Theodore asked, already moving toward a crystal decanter on a side table. "Water. Tea. Something stronger." "Water would be fine," Amelia managed, her throat suddenly dry. She watched as he poured 2 glasses with hands that weren't quite steady. Theodore returned to his seat, passing her a glass before settling behind his desk. He didn't speak immediately, instead studying her with an intensity that made her want to squirm. Finally, he broke the silence. "I've made terrible mistakes," he said quietly. "Mistakes that have affected not just you, but 2 innocent children who deserve better." Amelia's heart clenched at the mention of her twins. Are they okay?" Theodore's expression tightened. "Physically. They want for nothing. They have the best of everything. Education, healthcare, toys, attention. But emotionally?" He shook his head, running a hand through his graying hair. "They're struggling. They've always been different from other children their age. More reserved. More searching." He stood abruptly, moving to one of the large windows. "Aidan asks questions constantly. About family, about where he came from. He's remarkably perceptive for his age. And Ava." His voice caught. "Ava barely speaks. She watches everything, everyone, with these huge eyes that seem to hold so much sadness. She doesn't trust easily, and when she does open up, it's usually to ask why she feels different from other children." Amelia's vision blurred with tears. I was told they were thriving." Theodore turned back to face her, his expression pained. "Your mother painted a very rosy picture, I'm sure. She was quite motivated to ensure the arrangement went through." His tone carried a hint of bitterness. "But children need more than material comfort. They need roots, identity, connection. I thought I could give them everything they needed, but I was wrong." Moving back to his desk, Theodore pulled out a leather photo album. His fingers trembled slightly as he opened it. "I've documented everything. Their first steps, first words, every milestone. But look at their eyes in these photos." He turned the album toward Amelia, who leaned forward eagerly. The pictures showed 2 beautiful children with her dark hair and delicate features. But Theodore was right. Even in moments of apparent joy, There was something reserved in their expressions, especially Ava's. "They're beautiful," Amelia whispered, touching the photos gently. "They are," Theodore agreed. "But they're incomplete. They need their mother." He closed the album carefully. "I've tried to fill that void, but I can't. No amount of money or privilege can replace what they're missing." Amelia swallowed hard. "What exactly are you suggesting?" "I want you to be part of their lives," Theodore said firmly. "Not just a visit or two. I mean really part of their lives. They need to know who you are, where they came from. They need to understand that they weren't abandoned or unwanted." The weight of his words settled over Amelia like a heavy blanket. "But won't that confuse them? Disrupt their routine?" "Their routine is already disrupted," Theodore said quietly. "They're asking questions I can't answer. Aiden woke up crying last night, asking why he feels like something is missing. Ava, she just sits at her window sometimes, staring out like she's waiting for someone." He leaned forward, his expression earnest. "I know this is overwhelming. I know I'm asking a lot. But these children, your children, they need healing. We all do. I was wrong to think I could simply give them a privileged life and everything would be fine. The emptiness they feel, it's getting worse, not better." Amelia stood up, needing to move. She paced the length of the study, her mind racing. "Are they here now?" she asked suddenly. Theodore nodded. "They're in the playroom with their nanny. They don't know you're here. I wanted to speak with you first. Make sure you understood the situation." "And what if—" Amelia's voice caught. "What if they reject me? What if I make things worse?" Theodore's expression softened. "They might be confused at first. It won't be easy. But children have an amazing capacity for love and healing when given the chance. They need to know their story, the real story, not the sanitized version I've been telling them." He stood and moved around the desk to stand near her. "I'm not asking you to take them away or disrupt their entire lives. I'm asking you to help me give them what they need most, their mother's love. We can figure out the details together, but these children need both of us to put aside our pride and fear and do what's best for them." Amelia wrapped her arms around herself, feeling simultaneously terrified and hopeful. "When?" she asked, echoing her question from yesterday's phone call. "When would you want me to meet them?" "That depends on you," Theodore replied gently. "Are you ready? Really ready? Because once we start this, there's no going back. These children have been through enough. We can't introduce you only to have you disappear again." The challenge in his words was clear, but so was the underlying concern, not just for the twins, but for her as well. Amelia took a deep breath, straightening her shoulders. "I've spent every day for the past year thinking about them, missing them, wondering if I made the right choice," she said quietly but firmly. "I'm terrified, but I'm ready. I want to make this right." Theodore nodded, relief visible in his features. "Then perhaps, would you like to see them now? Not to introduce yourself yet, just to observe them playing, to see who they've become." Amelia's heart leaped and plummeted simultaneously. "Yes," she whispered. "Please." Theodore moved towards the door, then paused. "Ms. Bennett, Amelia, thank you. For coming today, for being willing to help heal what I helped break. These children deserve all the love in the world, and I'm beginning to understand that means they need both of us." As they left the study together, Amelia felt as though she was walking through a dream. Somewhere in this massive house, her babies were playing, unaware that their mother was just steps away. The thought filled her with equal parts terror and joy, but underneath it all was a sense of rightness. Whatever came next would be difficult, but at least they were finally moving in the right direction. Theodore led Amelia down a sunlit hallway, their footsteps muffled by thick carpeting. The sound of children's laughter drifted from behind a half-open door, making Amelia's heart skip several beats. She paused, her hand reaching out to steady herself against the wall. "Are you all right?" Theodore asked quietly. Amelia nodded, though her whole body trembled. "Just give me a moment." Through the doorway, she could see a spacious playroom filled with toys. Soft, educational music played in the background, and morning sunlight streamed through large windows. A young woman, presumably the nanny, sat cross-legged on a colourful playmat, watching two toddlers explore their surroundings. Amelia's breath caught in her throat. Her babies! They weren't really babies anymore. They were proper little people now, steady on their feet as they toddled around the room. Aidan, wearing blue overalls and a striped shirt, was stacking wooden blocks with intense concentration. Ava, dressed in a pink jumper, sat a few feet away, carefully turning the pages of a picture book. Theodore cleared his throat softly. "Sarah," he called to the nanny, "would you give us some time?" The young woman looked up, noticing them for the first time. She smiled kindly at Amelia before getting to her feet. "Of course, Mr. Barrington." She patted each child's head as she passed, then slipped out of the room. The twins looked up at the movement, their identical brown eyes, Amelia's eyes, widening as they took in the unfamiliar woman standing beside their father. Aidan immediately dropped his blocks, his curiosity evident as he pushed himself to his feet. Ava, however, clutched her book tighter and shifted backward slightly. "Hello," Amelia managed, her voice barely above a whisper. She slowly knelt down, trying to appear less intimidating. I'm Amelia." Aidan took a tentative step forward, his head tilted to one side. There was something in his expression, a spark of recognition, perhaps, or just the natural openness of a child, that gave Amelia hope. He glanced back at Theodore, who had remained standing by the door, then back to Amelia. "Would you like to see what I'm building?" Aidan asked, his voice small but clear. Tears pricked at Amelia's eyes. "I would love that," she replied. As she moved closer to Aidan's block creation, she couldn't help but notice Ava inching further away, pressing herself against a nearby bookshelf. The little girl's face was a mask of uncertainty, her lower lip trembling slightly. "Ava?" Theodore said gently. "It's okay. She's someone very special who wants to meet you both." Amelia sat down next to Aidan's blocks, careful to keep some distance between them. "This is amazing," she said, indicating his structure. "Are you building a tower?" Aidan nodded enthusiastically. "A big one, like where Daddy works." The word Daddy sent a jolt through Amelia's chest, but she maintained her smile. "That's wonderful. You're very good at this." "Daddy says I'm smart," Aidan declared proudly. He picked up another block, then paused, looking at Amelia with sudden intensity. "Why are you crying?" Amelia hadn't even realized tears were rolling down her cheeks. She quickly wiped them away. Sometimes people cry when they're happy," she explained. "Are you happy to see us?" Aidan asked innocently. "Yes," Amelia whispered. "Very happy." From her corner, Ava watched the interaction with wide, worried eyes. Theodore moved, closer to her, crouching down to her level. "Would you like to come say hello?" he asked softly. Ava shook her head, clutching her book like a shield. Amelia's heart ached at her daughter's fear, but she understood it. She turned her attention back to Aidan, who was now happily showing her how to stack the blocks just right. His small hands were so careful, so precise, just like she remembered them being when he was a newborn, grasping her finger with surprising strength. I need to tell you both something," Amelia said carefully, glancing between the twins. "Something very important." Aidan looked up at her expectantly, while Ava remained frozen in her corner. Amelia's voice cracked. She looked at Theodore, who nodded encouragingly. "I'm your mother. Your birth mother." Confusion clouded Aidan's features. He looked at Theodore, then back at Amelia. "But Mommy says you're my daddy," he said to Theodore, his voice filled with innocent certainty. The words hit both adults like a physical blow. Theodore's face paled, and Amelia felt as though all the air had been sucked from the room. In that simple statement, the full weight of their decisions, the lies, the separation, the loss, came crashing down around them. A small sob escaped from Ava's corner, and they all turned to see her pressing her face into her book, shoulders shaking. Theodore moved to comfort her, but she shrank away from his touch. "I don't understand," Aidan said, his lower lip beginning to quiver. "Are you my mommy?" He looked at Amelia with increasing distress. "But where were you? Why weren't you here?" The questions Amelia had dreaded most came tumbling out of her son's mouth, each one like a knife to her heart. She reached out instinctively to comfort him, but he backed away, moving closer to Theodore. Amelia struggled to find words simple enough for a 1-year-old to understand, yet true enough to begin healing the wounds they'd created. "I am your mother. I loved you. I love you both, very, very much. But sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, even when they're trying to do what's best." "Mistakes?" Aidan echoed, his small face scrunched in confusion. Theodore stepped forward, still keeping a respectful distance from the clearly overwhelmed Ava. "We all made mistakes," he said quietly. "But we're trying to fix them now, because we all love you both very much." The emotional tension in the room was palpable. Ava's quiet sobs continued from her corner. Aidan stood frozen between the adults he knew as father and this new person claiming to be mother, and both Amelia and Theodore felt the weight of their past decisions crushing down on them. In that moment, the damage they had done became crystal clear. These weren't just confused children. They were little souls trying to make sense of a world that had suddenly shifted beneath their feet. The simple truth in Aidan's statement, "Mommy says you're my daddy," had exposed the fragile foundation their lives had been built upon. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of Theodore Barrington's mansion, casting long shadows across the playroom floor. Amelia sat cross-legged on the plush carpet, watching as Aidan carefully arranged his toy cars in a perfect line. 3 days had passed since that first emotional meeting, and while the wounds were still raw, small changes were beginning to emerge. "The red one goes here," Aidan explained seriously, pointing to a spot in his carefully organized lineup. "Because red is for going fast." Amelia smiled, cherishing these small moments of connection. "That makes perfect sense. You're very organized, aren't you?" Aidan beamed at the praise, then hesitated before holding out another car, a shiny blue one. "Do you want to play too?" The simple gesture made Amelia's heart soar. "I'd love to," she said softly, accepting the toy with trembling fingers. From across the room, Ava sat alone in her reading nook, a large picture book spread across her lap. Though she appeared absorbed in the pages, Amelia noticed how her daughter's eyes would occasionally dart their way, watching their interaction with a mixture of curiosity and fear before quickly looking away. "Would you like to join us, Ava?" Amelia called out gently. "There are plenty of cars for everyone." Ava's response was to turn another page of her book, deliberately ignoring the invitation. The rejection stung, but Amelia tried to hide her pain for Aidan's sake. Theodore entered the playroom, his presence immediately drawing both children's attention. Ava's face lit up for the first time that morning, and she quickly abandoned her book to run to him. "Daddy." The word still felt like a punch to Amelia's stomach, but she forced herself to remain composed as Theodore scooped Ava into his arms. "How are my favorite twins today?" he asked, his voice warm, but his eyes betraying his anxiety as they darted between Amelia and the children. "We're playing cars," Aiden announced proudly. Amelia is playing too." He stumbled over what to call her, clearly uncertain about using Mom, despite knowing who she was. Theodore's grip on Ava tightened slightly. "That's wonderful, but remember what we talked about? It's almost time for your afternoon nap." "But we just started playing," Aiden protested, looking desperately between Theodore and Amelia. "The schedule is important," Theodore insisted, his protective instincts clearly taking over. "Structure helps them feel secure," he added, directing this explanation to Amelia with an apologetic but firm expression. Amelia bit back her frustration. "Of course," she managed to say. "We can play more later, Aiden." As Theodore ushered the twins toward their nap time routine, Amelia couldn't help but notice how Ava clung to him, while Aiden kept glancing back at her with confused longing in his eyes. The pattern continued over the next few days. Every time Amelia seemed to make progress with Aiden, something would interrupt their bonding, usually Theodore's well-meaning but overly protective interventions. Whether it was strict meal times, educational activities, or carefully scheduled play periods, there seemed to be little room for natural, spontaneous connection. During a quiet moment in the garden, while the twins were having their supervised outdoor time, Amelia finally confronted Theodore. "They need time to adjust naturally," she said, trying to keep her voice level. "All these rigid schedules and interruptions, they're not helping." Theodore ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of obvious distress. "You don't understand. After what happened, after what we did, they need stability, structure. What they need is to heal," Amelia countered, watching as Aiden attempted to show Ava a butterfly he'd spotted. Her daughter turned away, retreating to the safety of her nanny's side. "And right now, all this protection is just building more walls." "I see how Ava withdraws," Theodore admitted, his voice heavy with guilt. "But I don't know how to help her. And Aiden, he's so confused. Sometimes I catch him staring at old photos, trying to make sense of everything." Amelia's heart ached at the image. "That's exactly why they need space to process this in their own way. Your guilt, our guilt, it's making everything worse." Before Theodore could respond, a small cry drew their attention. Aiden had tripped while chasing the butterfly, scraping his knee on the garden path. Without thinking, both adults rushed forward, but it was Amelia who reached him first. "Let me see, sweetheart," she soothed, gently examining the scratch. Aiden's tears slowed as she tenderly brushed away the dirt. "It hurts," he whimpered. "I know it does," Amelia said softly. "But you're very brave. Should we go get a Band-Aid?" Aiden nodded, then surprised everyone by reaching up his arms to be carried. Amelia's eyes met Theodore's, seeking permission. After a moment's hesitation, he nodded. As Amelia carried Aiden inside, she caught sight of Ava watching them with an unreadable expression. The little girl quickly turned away when their eyes met, but not before Amelia saw the conflict in her daughter's face. Later that evening, as Amelia prepared to leave for her hotel, she found Aiden's favorite toy car tucked into her purse, the blue one he'd first shared with her. The simple gesture of trust brought tears to her eyes, even as she worried about the long road ahead. The emotional scars ran deep, deeper than any of them had initially realized. Ava's withdrawal was becoming more pronounced, while Aiden's attempts to connect were frequently hampered by confusion and uncertainty. Theodore's protective instincts, born of guilt and genuine love for the twins, created an additional barrier to the healing they all desperately needed. As Amelia drove away from the mansion, she could see the twins' bedroom light still on, two small shadows moving behind the curtains. One shadow, Aidan's, waved goodbye. The other, Ava's, remained still and distant, a physical representation of the emotional walls they still needed to break down. The complexity of their situation weighed heavily on Amelia's heart. These were her children, yet they were strangers. She was their mother, yet they called another man Daddy. The path to healing seemed increasingly complicated, tangled in a web of protective measures, guilt, and deep-seated emotional trauma that none of them had fully anticipated. The morning sun filtered through the mansion's tall windows as Amelia sat in the formal living room, watching Aidan and Ava play with their toys. Well, Aidan played, rolling his favorite blue car across the expensive Persian rug, while Ava sat in a corner, holding her stuffed rabbit close and occasionally glancing at them with wary eyes. Amelia's heart ached with a familiar emptiness. These were her children, her flesh and blood, yet they felt like strangers. She could see pieces of herself in them, Aidan's curious nature, Ava's thoughtful expressions, but the connection she desperately yearned for seemed just out of reach. Theodore hovered near the doorway, his presence a constant reminder of the complicated situation they all found themselves in. His fingers drummed nervously against the door frame as he watched the scene unfold. "Vroom, vroom!" Aidan's excited voice broke through the tension as he pushed his car toward Amelia. "Look what it can do." Amelia leaned forward, matching his enthusiasm. "That's amazing. Does it go really fast?" Aidan nodded eagerly, his eyes bright. "Super fast. Want to play?" "I'd love to," Amelia replied, sliding down to sit cross-legged on the floor. From his position by the door, Theodore cleared his throat. "Remember, Aidan, we have your reading lesson in 15 minutes. Amelia bit back a sigh of frustration. Every moment of connection seemed to be interrupted by Theodore's rigid scheduling. She understood his guilt drove his need for control, but it was becoming a barrier to their healing. Aidan's face fell slightly, but he continued playing, pushing the car between Amelia's hands. Their laughter filled the room, and for a brief moment it felt natural, like they were just a mother and son playing together. "Mom, catch it!" Aidan called out, sending the car zooming across the floor. The word hung in the air like a suspended note. Mom. He'd called her Mom. Amelia's heart swelled with emotion, tears pricking at her eyes. She caught the car, but her hands trembled slightly. Theodore stepped forward, his face a mix of concern and something else, perhaps jealousy. But before he could speak, Ava suddenly stood up, clutching her rabbit tighter. "He shouldn't call you that," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "You're not our real mum. You left us." The words cut through Amelia like a knife. "Ava, sweetheart, No." Ava backed away, shaking her head. "You gave us away. Real mums don't do that." Theodore moved to comfort Ava, but she ducked under his arm and ran from the room. The sound of her footsteps echoed through the hallway, followed by the slam of a door. Aidan looked confused and upset, his lower lip trembling. "Did I do something wrong?" "No, sweetie," Amelia assured him, though her own voice shook. "You didn't do anything wrong." Theodore ran a hand through his hair, his guilt visible in every movement. "I should go check on her." "Maybe," Amelia started, standing up slowly. "Maybe I should try." Theodore hesitated, his protective instincts warring with the knowledge that they needed to make progress. Finally, he nodded. "Her room is upstairs, second door on the left." Amelia climbed the grand staircase, her heart pounding with each step. The weight of lost time pressed down on her shoulders. How could she possibly make up for all the birthdays, skinned knees, and bedtime stories she'd missed? She found Ava's room easily. It was the one with pink butterflies painted on the door. Knocking gently, she called out, "Ava, can we talk?" No response came from inside, but Amelia could hear soft sniffling. She pressed her forehead against the cool wood of the door. "I know you're angry with me," she continued softly. "You have every right to be. What I did, it wasn't because I didn't love you. I loved you and Aiden so much it hurt." The sniffling paused. "I thought I was doing what was best for you both. I was wrong, and I'm so sorry. I know sorry doesn't fix it. I know it doesn't make up for all the time we lost. But I'm here now, and I want to try, if you'll let me." Silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant sound of Aiden and Theodore talking downstairs. Finally, Ava's small voice came through the door. "Why didn't you want us?" The question broke Amelia's heart all over again. "Oh, sweetheart, I did want you. I wanted you both so much. I was young and scared, and I listened to people who told me you'd be better off without me. It was the biggest mistake of my life." The door cracked open slightly, revealing Ava's tear-stained face. She still clutched her rabbit, using it like a shield between them. "Aiden wants you to be our mum," she said quietly. "But I don't know if I can." Amelia nodded, fighting back her own tears. "That's okay. You don't have to know right now. We can take all the time you need." Ava studied her face for a long moment, then opened the door a bit wider. "Do you want to meet Hoppy?" she asked, holding up her rabbit slightly. "I'd love to meet Hoppy," Amelia replied softly, recognizing this small gesture for the olive branch it was. They sat together on Ava's bed, keeping a careful distance between them, as Ava told the story of how Theodore had given her Hoppy on her first Christmas. Amelia listened intently, treasuring this moment of connection, however small. Downstairs, they could hear Aiden's laughter mixing with Theodore's deeper voice. The sound reminded Amelia of how different her two children were, Aiden's openness contrasting with Ava's caution. She wondered if they would ever find a balance, if there was any way to truly heal the wounds that their separation had caused. Theodore appeared in the doorway, looking uncertain. "It's time for their afternoon lessons," he announced, though his tone was gentler than usual. Ava immediately stood up, ready to return to the familiar routine that made her feel safe. But before she left the room, she turned back to Amelia. Maybe you could come back tomorrow?" she suggested hesitantly. Amelia's heart soared at these simple words. "I'd like that very much." As she watched her children follow Theodore down the hallway, Amelia felt a complex mix of emotions wash over her. There was hope in Aiden's easy acceptance and his use of the word mom, joy in Ava's small step toward connection, and lingering sadness for all the moments they'd lost. The path ahead wouldn't be easy. Theodore's protective instincts and scheduling still created barriers, and Ava's walls wouldn't come down overnight. But for the first time since she'd returned to their lives, Amelia felt like maybe, just maybe, they could find their way back to being a family, whatever that might look like. The evening sun cast long shadows through the mansion's tall windows as Amelia paced in Theodore's study. Her fingers traced the spine of leather-bound books on mahogany shelves, each one probably worth more than she made in a month. The wealth surrounding her only fueled her growing frustration. She turned as Theodore entered, his expensive suit perfectly pressed, not a hair out of place. The contrast between his polished appearance and the emotional mess beneath couldn't have been starker. "We need to talk about the twins," Amelia said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Theodore sat behind his massive desk, automatically creating a barrier between them. "What about them? They have the best tutors, the finest clothes, every toy they could want." That's exactly the problem. Amelia cut in. You think throwing money at everything will fix it? But have you noticed how Ava barely speaks? How Aidan tries so hard to please everyone he's losing himself? Theodore's jaw tightened. I've given them everything. Everything except what they really need. Amelia countered. She moved closer to the desk, placing her hands on its polished surface. They need emotional support, Theodore. They need to feel safe expressing their feelings, not just showing off their new toys or reciting their lessons. I provide structure, stability. You provide schedules and rules. Amelia's voice rose slightly. When was the last time you just sat with them? Not checking their homework or watching them practice piano, but really sat with them. When did you last ask Ava why she carries that rabbit everywhere, or listen to Aidan's fears about disappointing you? Theodore stood abruptly, his chair rolling back. I'm doing my best. I didn't exactly have a manual for raising twins who lost their mother. They didn't lose me. You bought me out. The words hung heavy in the air between them. Amelia took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. And now you're trying to buy their happiness too? Theodore's shoulders slumped slightly, the first crack in his perfect facade. What else can I do? Money is what I know. It's how I've always solved problems. But this isn't a business deal gone wrong, Amelia said, her voice softening. These are children, our children. They need love, understanding, patience. They need to know it's okay to be sad or angry about what happened to them. Theodore sank back into his chair, suddenly looking older. I thought if I could give them everything I never had, they'd be happy. The best schools, the finest things. But you had those things growing up, didn't you? Amelia asked gently. Did they make you happy? The question seemed to hit Theodore like a physical blow. He stared at his hands, manicured and soft from a lifetime of privilege. No, he whispered. No, they didn't. The twins don't need more things, Theodore. They need guidance through their emotions. They need to understand why their family is the way it is, and to know that it's okay to have complicated feelings about it. Theodore was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming on the desk. I don't know how, he finally admitted. I don't know how to handle emotions, mine or theirs. Every time Ava withdraws or Aidan looks worried, I buy them something new, as if another doll or game could fill the hole we created. Then let me help, Amelia said. Let me take the lead in helping them heal. Stop blocking me with schedules and lessons and rules. I'm not blocking you, Theodore protested weakly. You are. Every time I try to have a real conversation with them, there's another lesson, another appointment, another activity. They're so busy they don't have time to feel, let alone process those feelings. Theodore stood and walked to the window, his back to Amelia. The setting sun painted him in shades of gold and shadow. I'm afraid, he admitted quietly. Afraid they'll choose you over me. Afraid they'll hate me when they understand what I did. They won't hate you, Amelia assured him. But they need to understand the truth, all of it, and they need space to work through their feelings about it. Theodore turned back to face her, his usual confidence stripped away. What do you need me to do? Step back, Amelia said firmly. Let me spend real time with them. Cancel some of these endless activities. Give them room to breathe, to feel, to be kids who are dealing with a complicated situation. And you think you can help them? I can try, but I need you to trust me, Theodore. Trust that I want what's best for them just as much as you do. Theodore walked back to his desk and picked up their schedule book. With deliberate movements, he began crossing out activities. 2 music lessons a week instead of 5. He murmured. Art class only on Saturdays. Cancel the French tutor. Amelia watched him, hope blooming in her chest. This was the first real step toward healing, not just for the twins, but for all of them. "I'll tell the staff to defer to you regarding their free time," Theodore said, looking up from the schedule. "But promise me something." "What?" "Promise me you won't cut me out completely. They're my whole world." Amelia nodded solemnly. "They need both of us, Theodore, just in a different way than before." As she left the study, Amelia felt lighter than she had in days. It wouldn't be easy. Nothing about this situation was. But finally, they were moving in the right direction. Finally, they were putting the children's emotional needs first. Through the window, she could see Aidan and Ava playing in the garden, their small figures dwarfed by the massive topiaries and marble fountains. Soon, she hoped, they would learn that love wasn't measured in expensive toys or endless lessons, but in the time and understanding their parents were finally ready to give them. The morning sun filtered through the mansion's tall windows, casting long shadows across the marble floors. Amelia sat in the newly simplified playroom, where many of the excessive toys had been removed to create a calmer space. She watched as Aidan carefully stacked wooden blocks, his small face twisted in concentration. "Can you help me build a castle, Mom?" he asked, pushing some blocks toward her. The word Mom still made her heart skip a beat. It had only been a few days since he'd started using it, and each time felt like a precious gift. "Of course, sweetheart," she replied, moving to sit cross-legged beside him on the plush carpet. As they built together, Aidan's small hands occasionally brushed against hers. Each touch felt like a bridge being built between them, slowly but surely. On the other side of the room, Ava sat alone, clutching her favorite stuffed rabbit and watching them with wary eyes. "Would you like to join us, Ava?" Amelia called softly, trying to keep the desperation out of her voice. Ava's only response was to turn away, pressing her face into her rabbit's worn fur. Aidan noticed his sister's rejection and frowned. "Why doesn't Ava like you?" he asked innocently, placing another block on their growing structure. Amelia's throat tightened. "Sometimes," she began carefully, "when people are hurt or scared, they need more time to trust again. Your sister is trying to protect herself." "From what?" Aidan's curious eyes met hers. "From being hurt again," Amelia whispered, her heart aching. Aidan was quiet for a moment, his little fingers tracing the edges of a wooden block. "Where were you before?" he finally asked. "When we were babies?" The question she'd been dreading had finally come. Amelia took a deep breath, knowing this conversation could change everything. I was trying to make sure you and your sister would have a good life," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "But why didn't you stay with us?" Aidan's lower lip quivered. "Didn't you want us?" Tears pricked at Amelia's eyes. "Oh, sweetheart, I wanted you more than anything in the world. Both of you. But sometimes—" She paused, searching for words a child could understand. "Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes because they're scared and confused." From across the room, she noticed Ava had turned slightly, listening while pretending not to. "I was very young when you and Ava were born," Amelia continued. "I didn't have much money, and I was scared I couldn't give you everything you needed. My mother, your grandmother, she told me that Mr. Theodore could give you a better life than I could. But we needed you," Aidan said simply, his words piercing her heart like arrows. "Yes," Amelia agreed, wiping away a tear. "You did. And I'm so sorry I didn't understand that then. That's why I'm here now, trying to make things right." Aidan abandoned his blocks and crawled into her lap, a gesture that both healed and hurt. "I don't understand," he admitted, his small voice muffled against her shirt. I know, sweetheart. I don't really understand it all myself sometimes. She held him close, savoring his trust while being acutely aware of Ava's continued distance. Later that afternoon, Amelia attempted to spend one-on-one time with Ava. She sat near, but not too near, where the little girl was coloring, and began to softly hum a lullaby she used to sing when they were newborns. Ava's crayon stopped moving, but she didn't look up. "That's a beautiful picture," Amelia commented gently. "May I see it?" Ava's response was to gather her crayons and move to the other side of the room. "Ava," Amelia called softly, "would you like to hear a story?" The little girl shook her head firmly, her back still turned. Amelia's heart cracked a little more, but she persisted. "That's okay. I'll just sit here for a while, if that's all right with you." No response. For the next hour, Amelia simply sat quietly, occasionally commenting on the weather or describing the birds she could see through the window. Ava remained resolutely turned away, but she didn't leave the room. When it was time for their afternoon snack, Amelia approached Ava slowly, kneeling down beside her. "Would you like me to help you wash your hands before we eat?" Ava's face crumpled, and the tears began. They weren't the typical toddler tears of frustration or tiredness. These were deep, heart-wrenching sobs that seemed to come from somewhere far too painful for such a small child to know. Instinctively, Amelia reached for her daughter, but Ava scrambled away, her cries growing louder. The rejection felt like a physical blow, but Amelia forced herself to stay calm. "It's okay to cry, sweetheart," she said softly. "It's okay to be angry with me. I'm not going anywhere." Ava's sobs continued as she pressed herself into the corner of the room, her little body shaking with the force of her emotions. Amelia's own tears fell silently as she watched her daughter's pain, knowing she was the cause of it. "I love you, Ava," she whispered. "Even when you're angry, even when you cry, even when you don't want me near you, I love you, and I'll be here when you're ready." The afternoon stretched on, filled with Ava's tears and Amelia's quiet presence. She didn't try to touch her daughter again, didn't try to force a connection. Instead, she simply stayed, bearing witness to Ava's pain, showing her daughter through actions rather than words that she wouldn't abandon her again. When Theodore came to check on them, Amelia shook her head slightly, silently asking him to give them space. He hesitated, but respected her request, leaving them alone with their shared grief. Eventually, Ava's sobs quieted to hiccups, then to sniffles. Her small body remained curled in the corner, but the tension in her shoulders had eased slightly. Amelia continued to sit nearby, her heart both breaking and hoping. "Would you like me to read you a story?" she asked softly. "I can sit right here, and you can stay where you are." Ava didn't respond, but she didn't object either. Amelia reached for a nearby picture book and began to read, her voice gentle and steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm her. As she read, she noticed Ava's body gradually relaxing, though the little girl still wouldn't look at her. It wasn't much, not compared to Aiden's growing affection or his willingness to call her mom, but it was something. A tiny crack in the wall Ava had built around herself. Amelia would take it, would nurture it, would prove to her daughter day after day that her love was unconditional and unwavering. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the playroom floor, Amelia remained. She would stay as long as it took, would weather any storm of emotion, would accept any rejection, until both her children knew in their hearts that she would never leave them again. The morning sun cast long shadows across the familiar suburban street where Amelia had grown up. She sat in her car, hands gripping the steering wheel, staring at the modest two-story house that held so many memories, both good and painful. Her mother's car was in the driveway, its pristine condition a testament to her priorities, appearances above all else. Amelia's heart pounded as she stepped out of her car. The weight of the past few weeks with Aidan and Ava pressed heavily on her shoulders, fueling her determination to confront the woman who had convinced her to give up her children. She walked up the neat concrete path, lined with perfectly trimmed roses, her mother's pride and joy. Each step felt heavier than the last, but Amelia pressed forward. She needed answers. She needed to understand why her own mother had pushed her to make a decision that had caused so much pain. The doorbell chimed, and within moments her mother appeared, wearing an expression of mild surprise that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Amelia," she said, her voice carrying that familiar note of criticism. "This is unexpected." "We need to talk, Mother," Amelia replied, her voice steadier than she felt. Her mother's lips tightened, but she stepped aside to let Amelia in. The house smelled of furniture polish and artificial air freshener, exactly as it always had. Everything was in its place, not a cushion out of position, not a speck of dust in sight. "I suppose this is about the twins?" her mother said, leading the way to the living room. She sat in her favorite armchair, smoothing her perfectly pressed slacks. "I heard you've been spending time with them." Amelia remained standing, too tense to sit. "Why did you do it?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Why did you pressure me into giving them up when I was at my most vulnerable?" Her mother's expression hardened. "I did what was best for everyone involved. Those children are living a life of luxury with Theodore Barrington. What could you have offered them?" The casual cruelty of the response made Amelia's chest tight with anger. "Love," she said firmly. "I could have offered them love." "Love doesn't pay bills, Amelia," her mother scoffed. "Love doesn't provide education or opportunities. You were barely making ends meet. Be realistic." "Realistic?" Amelia's voice rose. "You think it was realistic to separate twins from their mother? To let them grow up feeling abandoned and confused about their identity?" Her mother waved a dismissive hand. "They're fine. They have everything they could possibly want." "Except they're not fine," Amelia exploded. "Ava can barely look at me. Aidan is full of questions I don't know how to answer. They're hurt and confused, and it's because of what you convinced me to do." "What I convinced you to do?" Her mother's voice took on a dangerous edge. "Nobody forced you to sign those papers, Amelia. You made that choice yourself." "I was exhausted, emotional, and terrified." Amelia's hands shook as she spoke. "I had just given birth to twins, and instead of supporting me, you spent weeks telling me how I would ruin their lives if I kept them. You wore me down until I believed I had no choice." Her mother stood up, straightening her blouse with precise movements. "You're being dramatic. Theodore Barrington offered those children a life you could never provide. It was the sensible decision." "Sensible?" Amelia laughed bitterly. "Was it sensible to take advantage of your own daughter's vulnerability? To push her into giving up her children for money?" Her mother's face flushed. "The arrangement was completely legal." "Legal doesn't make it right." Amelia cut her off. "Do you have any idea what it did to me? What it's still doing to those children? Those children have everything they could ever want." Her mother repeated stubbornly. "Except their mother," Amelia said, quietly. "Except the chance to grow up knowing they were wanted and loved from the moment they were born." Her mother's expression remained cold and unmoved. "If you're here looking for an apology, you're wasting your time. I stand by what I did." The words hit Amelia like a physical blow. She stared at her mother, really seeing her for perhaps the first time, seeing the emptiness where maternal love should have been, the cold calculation that had always governed her actions. "You know what's truly sad?" Amelia said, her voice quiet but firm. "You're so convinced that money equals love that you can't even see the damage you've done. Not just to Aiden and Ava, but to me. To our relationship. Don't be melodramatic, Amelia, her mother said sharply. Everything I've ever done has been for your benefit. No. Amelia shook her head. Everything you've ever done has been for your benefit. For appearances. For what other people might think. But never, not once, for what I needed as your daughter. Her mother's face hardened further. If you've come here just to throw accusations, I came here for answers. Amelia interrupted, and I got them. Not in your words, but in your complete inability to take responsibility for what you did, in your total lack of empathy for what those children are going through. She turned towards the door, then paused. I won't be back, Mother. I'm going to focus on healing my relationship with my children, on showing them what real maternal love looks like, on being everything you never were to me. Her mother's voice followed her to the door. You're making a mistake, Amelia. Those children are better off. Those children are my responsibility now, Amelia said firmly, her hand on the doorknob. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life making up for the mistake I made in listening to you. She walked out of the house, not looking back even as she heard her mother call her name. The morning sun felt warmer now, more welcoming. Despite the pain of the confrontation, Amelia felt lighter, clearer, more certain of her path forward. As she drove back toward Theodore's estate, toward Aiden and Ava, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. Her mother would never acknowledge the pain she'd caused, would never take responsibility for her actions. But Amelia could break that cycle. She could show her children what real love looked like. Messy, imperfect, but unconditional. She would stay present for every tear, every question, every moment of anger or confusion. She would prove to them, day by day, that she was there to stay. That they were wanted, that they were loved. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time since reuniting with her children, Amelia felt truly ready to face it. She had confronted her past, faced the source of her pain, and emerged stronger. Now she could focus entirely on healing her family, starting with the two precious souls waiting for her at Theodore's estate. The afternoon sun streamed through the mansion's tall windows as Amelia sat cross-legged on the playroom floor. Colorful building blocks were scattered around her, and Aiden was busy constructing what he called a super-tall tower. His small hands worked carefully, his tongue sticking out in concentration. "Look, Mommy," he exclaimed, placing another block on top. "It's almost touching the sky." Amelia's heart swelled at the word Mommy. Each time he said it, it felt like a precious gift. Just weeks ago, he had been hesitant, calling her Miss Amelia or simply avoiding names altogether. Now the word flowed naturally from his lips, as if it had always belonged there. "That's amazing, sweetheart," she said, reaching out to steady the tower as it wobbled slightly. "You're getting really good at building these." From across the room, Ava watched silently, her dark eyes following their interaction. She sat in the window seat, clutching her favorite stuffed rabbit, maintaining the careful distance she always kept between herself and Amelia. When Amelia caught her eye and smiled, Ava quickly looked away, pressing herself further into the corner. "Ava, honey," Amelia called softly. "Would you like to help us build? There's plenty of blocks for everyone." Ava shook her head, her long dark hair falling forward to shield her face. Amelia's heart ached at the familiar rejection, but she kept her voice gentle and warm. "That's okay, sweetie. You can join us whenever you want." Theodore appeared in the doorway, his tall frame casting a shadow across the carpeted floor. He watched the scene with a mixture of concern and hope in his eyes. Over the past few weeks, he had kept his promise to step back, allowing Amelia to take the lead in rebuilding her relationship with the twins. "Daddy!" Aiden called out excitedly. Come see my tower." Theodore walked over, carefully navigating around the scattered blocks. "That's quite the architectural achievement, young man," he said, ruffling Aiden's hair affectionately. Amelia noticed how Ava's posture straightened slightly at Theodore's presence, though she still didn't move from her spot. The little girl's connection to Theodore was strong, built over months of him being her primary source of security. While it sometimes made Amelia feel a twinge of jealousy, she was grateful that Ava had someone she trusted completely. "I think it's almost snack time," Theodore announced, checking his watch. "Would anyone like some apple slices and peanut butter?" "Yes, please." Aiden jumped up, accidentally knocking over his tower in his excitement. His face fell as he watched his creation tumble. "Oh, sweetheart," Amelia said, pulling him into a quick hug. "Don't worry. We can build an even bigger one after snack time." Aiden's arms wrapped around her neck, and he pressed his face into her shoulder. "Promise, Mommy." "I promise," she whispered, breathing in the sweet scent of his hair. From her corner, Ava watched the exchange, her fingers tightening around her stuffed rabbit. When Theodore held out his hand to her, she slipped off the window seat and took it, but her eyes kept drifting back to Amelia and Aiden. In the kitchen, Amelia helped Theodore prepare the snacks, slicing apples while he got out plates and napkins. Aiden chatted animatedly about his tower plans, while Ava sat quietly at the table, her rabbit still clutched tightly. "Would you like to help me arrange the apple slices, Ava?" Amelia asked, keeping her tone light and casual. "We could make them look like a flower on the plate." Ava looked at Theodore, who gave her an encouraging nod, but she still shook her head. Amelia continued working, trying not to let her disappointment show. She had learned that pushing too hard only made Ava retreat further. "That's okay," Amelia said cheerfully. "Maybe next time." As they ate their snacks, Aiden continued to chatter, filling the kitchen with his bright energy. He told stories about his day at preschool, each tale punctuated with, "Right, Mommy," or "Remember, Mommy." Each time, Amelia's heart grew fuller, even as she noticed Ava watching these exchanges with an unreadable expression. After snack time, Theodore had to take a business call, leaving Amelia alone with the twins in the playroom again. Aiden immediately wanted to rebuild his tower, but this time he had grander plans. "Can we make it super-duper tall, Mommy? Like 100 feet tall?" Amelia laughed, gathering blocks. "Well, maybe not quite that tall, but we can definitely make it bigger than before." As they worked together, Amelia noticed Ava had moved slightly closer, though she still maintained her distance. Instead of sitting in the window seat, she was now on the floor, watching them from behind a large stuffed elephant. "You know," Amelia said casually, not looking directly at Ava, "this elephant could use a nice house too. There are plenty of blocks if anyone wanted to build one." She saw Ava's fingers twitch toward a nearby block, but the little girl pulled her hand back quickly, as if afraid of being caught showing interest. Amelia's heart ached, but she kept her face neutral, continuing to help Aiden with his tower. "Mommy?" Aiden said suddenly, his voice serious. "Why was Ava crying last night?" Amelia's hand stilled on the blocks. She had heard the muffled sobs coming from Ava's room the night before, but had known better than to intrude. Theodore had gone to comfort her, as he always did. "Sometimes," Amelia said carefully, aware that Ava was listening, "people cry because they have big feelings inside that they don't know how to talk about, and that's okay. Everyone has big feelings sometimes." "I have big feelings too," Aiden declared. "Sometimes I feel so happy I want to jump really high." Amelia smiled, pulling him close. "That's right, sweetheart, and it's good to share those feelings." She glanced at Ava, who was now staring intently at the block in front of her. Without looking up, the little girl reached, out and picked it up, turning it over in her hands. It wasn't much, but to Amelia it felt like a tiny breakthrough. They spent the rest of the afternoon building and playing, with Aidan's excited chatter filling the room. Every now and then, Amelia would notice Ava inching slightly closer, though she never joined them directly. By the time Theodore returned, Ava had built a small structure of her own, separate from theirs, but definitely inspired by Aidan's tower. "Look at all these wonderful buildings," Theodore said, surveying the room. "We have some talented architects here." Ava ducked her head at the praise, but Amelia caught the slight smile that crossed her face. It was a small moment, but it gave her hope. Every day brought tiny steps forward, even if they were sometimes followed by steps back. As Theodore helped clean up the blocks, Amelia watched her children. Aidan, open and affectionate, already calling her mommy with such natural ease, and Ava, still uncertain and guarded, but perhaps starting to let her walls down just a little. The road ahead was still long, but Amelia was committed to walking it at whatever pace her children needed. "Time for dinner," Theodore announced, checking his watch. "Should we have it in the dining room or the kitchen tonight?" "Kitchen," Aidan shouted, while Ava nodded in agreement. The kitchen had become their preferred spot, less formal and more conducive to the kind of family moments they were slowly building together. As they walked to the kitchen, Aidan slipped his small hand into Amelia's, chattering about what he hoped they would have for dinner. And though Ava still walked close to Theodore, Amelia noticed that the gap between them had shrunk just a little bit more. The winter holidays arrived with a gentle dusting of snow, transforming Theodore Barrington's sprawling estate into something that looked like it belonged on a greeting card. Inside the mansion's warm interior, Amelia helped Aidan hang colourful ornaments on an enormous Christmas tree, while soft holiday music played in the background. "Hiya, Mummy. I want this star to go way up there." Aidan stretched on his tiptoes, pointing to a spot just out of his reach. Amelia lifted him carefully, supporting his small body as he placed the glittering ornament exactly where he wanted it. His face glowed with pride as he admired his handiwork. "Perfect," she said, kissing the top of his head. "You have quite an eye for decorating." From her spot on the plush window seat, Ava watched them, her own ornament clutched tightly in her hands. Though she hadn't joined them at the tree, she had moved closer than usual, and Amelia counted that as progress. Theodore entered the room carrying a tray of hot chocolate, complete with whipped cream and candy canes. "I thought we could use some festive refreshments," he said, setting the tray down on the coffee table. "Careful now, it's still hot." Aidan scrambled down from Amelia's arms and rushed to the tray, but remembered his manners at the last moment. "Thank you," he said carefully, waiting for Theodore to hand him his mug. "Ava, sweetheart," Theodore called gently. "Would you like some hot chocolate?" The little girl nodded, sliding off her perch and approaching the group. She accepted her mug with both hands, and to everyone's surprise, sat down on the floor near where Amelia and Aidan were working on the tree. "Would you like to help us decorate?" Amelia asked softly, trying to keep her voice casual, despite the hope blooming in her chest. "There are some beautiful angels in this box that need homes on the tree." Ava looked at the box, then at her hot chocolate, then back at the box. After what seemed like an eternity, she set her mug down carefully and reached for an angel ornament. Without a word, she stood up and hung it on a lower branch of the tree, right next to one of Aidan's stars. Theodore watched from his armchair, his eyes misty. He had spent years trying to give the twins everything money could buy, but watching them now, decorating a Christmas tree with their mother, he realized what they had really needed all along. The genuine smile on Ava's face as she reached for another ornament was worth more than all the expensive gifts he had ever given them. The afternoon passed in a peaceful rhythm of decorating, sipping hot chocolate, and listening to holiday music. Aidan kept up a steady stream of questions about Christmas traditions, and Amelia answered each one patiently, sharing stories from her own childhood. "Did you have a big tree like this when you were little, Mommy?" Aidan asked, carefully hanging a glass ball. "No, sweetheart. Our tree was much smaller, but we made all our ornaments by hand. Maybe we could make some together this year." "Yes, please." Aidan bounced excitedly. "Can we make snowflakes and stars and reindeer and angels?" Ava's quiet voice surprised them all. It was the first thing she had said all afternoon. Amelia's heart swelled. "Of course we can make angels, sweetheart. As many as you'd like." Theodore cleared his throat, fighting back emotion. "I'll have Maria bring up some craft supplies after dinner. We can set up a table right here by the tree." As the sky outside darkened, the tree lights cast a warm glow across the room. Aidan had curled up next to Amelia on the sofa, tired from all the decorating, but still chattering about their crafting plans. Ava remained on the floor, but she had gradually moved closer to the sofa throughout the afternoon. "Should we order pizza for dinner?" Theodore suggested, breaking from his usual insistence on proper meals. "It feels like a pizza kind of night." "Yes!" both twins exclaimed in unison, and for a moment they shared a look of surprise at their synchronized response. Amelia laughed softly. "Pizza sounds perfect. We can eat in here and watch the tree lights." As Theodore stepped out to make the arrangements, Ava slowly stood up and approached the sofa. After a moment's hesitation, she climbed up and sat on Amelia's other side. She didn't say anything, didn't lean in for a hug like Aidan always did, but she was there, choosing to be close. Amelia felt tears prick at her eyes, but blinked them away quickly. She didn't want to overwhelm Ava with an emotional response that might make her retreat again. Instead, she simply sat still, providing a steady presence as both her children watched the twinkling lights on their first Christmas tree together. When Theodore returned, he paused in the doorway, taking in the scene before him. The guilt that had been his constant companion for so long felt lighter somehow. Yes, he had made mistakes, but watching Amelia with the twins, he could see that healing was possible. The children needed both of them, him with his steadfast protection and Amelia with her nurturing love. They ate pizza on the floor, using paper plates and napkins instead of the formal dining setup Theodore usually insisted upon. Aidan told jokes that made little sense, but had everyone smiling anyway. Even Ava giggled once, quickly covering her mouth as if surprised by her own laughter. As the evening drew to a close, with the twins growing sleepy and the room bathed in the soft glow of Christmas lights, there was a palpable sense of peace that none of them had felt before. It wasn't perfect. There were still wounds to heal and trust to rebuild, but it was real and warm and full of promise. Amelia looked at her children, at Theodore, at the beautiful tree they had decorated together, and felt something settle in her heart. This was what healing looked like. Not grand gestures or dramatic moments, but small steps forward, quiet choices to be present, and the gentle unfolding of love given time and space to grow. Aidan sat cross-legged on the floor near the Christmas tree, fiddling with a loose thread on his sweater. His eyes met Amelia's with a mix of curiosity and hesitation. "Mom, can you tell me about my real dad?" Amelia's heart skipped a beat. She glanced at Theodore, who gave her an encouraging nod from across the room. Taking a deep breath, she chose her words carefully. "Your father was someone I knew when I was very young," she began softly. "He wasn't ready to be a daddy when I told him about you and Ava. It was a very difficult time for me." Unknown to them, Ava had stopped playing with her new toys and was listening intently from behind the couch. "Did you love him?" Aidan asked, his voice small. I thought I did, Amelia answered honestly. But the love I felt for you and your sister was so much stronger. That's why giving you up was the hardest thing I've ever done. I wanted you to have everything I couldn't give you then. A soft sniffle came from behind the couch. Ava emerged, her eyes wet with tears. She moved closer, sitting down next to her brother. You didn't want to give us away? Ava whispered, speaking directly to Amelia for the first time in days. Never, Amelia said firmly, her own tears falling. I thought about you both every single day. I love you more than anything in this world. Ava hesitated for a moment, then crawled into Amelia's lap, burying her face in her mother's shoulder. Amelia held her daughter close, feeling the walls between them finally beginning to crumble. Aidan joined the embrace, and for several minutes they sat together in silence, healing old wounds with each shared breath. The winter sun cast long shadows through the windows of Amelia's mother's pristine living room. Amelia stood with her shoulders squared, facing the woman who had caused her so much pain. I need you to understand what you did to us, Amelia said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. You took my babies away when I was at my most vulnerable. Her mother sat perfectly composed in her expensive armchair, examining her manicured nails. I did what was best for everyone. Those children have had every advantage with Theodore Barrington. Every advantage except their mother's love. Amelia countered. You never once considered how this would affect them. Or me. Oh, please, her mother scoffed, waving her hand dismissively. You were young and penniless. What kind of life could you have given them? The cold response hit Amelia like a physical blow, but something inside her finally broke free. Years of guilt and shame melted away, replaced by a sudden clarity. This is the last time you'll ever see me, Amelia said quietly. I don't need your approval anymore. I don't need anything from you. Her mother's expression didn't change. You're being dramatic, as usual. Amelia turned and walked toward the door, each step feeling lighter than the last. She didn't look back as she left, knowing there was nothing left to say. When she returned to Theodore's estate, she found Aidan and Ava playing in the garden. Their laughter carried on the crisp air, and Theodore watched them from the patio with a gentle smile. This was her family now, imperfect, healing, but real. The weight she'd carried for so long began to lift from her shoulders. She had finally let go of the past, and her future was right here, waiting with open arms. As spring bloomed across the estate's gardens, so did the delicate bonds within its walls. Theodore had learned to step back, watching from a respectful distance as Amelia spent precious time with the twins. His guilt was slowly being replaced by hope as he witnessed the healing taking place. One afternoon, Aidan sat with Amelia on the window seat of the library, his small hand wrapped around hers. You know what, Mom? He said softly, the word Mom now flowing naturally from his lips. I used to think having lots of toys meant having everything, but this feels different. Different how, sweetheart? Amelia asked, her heart warming at his words. Like we're a real family now, not just people living in the same house. Aidan leaned against her shoulder, his eyes bright with understanding beyond his years. Across the room, Ava sat quietly with her coloring book. Though she still kept her emotional distance, small changes were becoming visible. She had started seeking out Amelia's company during mealtimes, and occasionally would ask for help with simple tasks, each request a tiny bridge being built between them. One evening, Ava surprised everyone by climbing into Amelia's lap during story time. She didn't say anything, but her actions spoke volumes. The way she relaxed against Amelia's chest, the slight smile that crossed her face when Amelia stroked her hair. These were the precious moments that showed healing was possible. Theodore observed these changes from his study, his heart both heavy and light. He saw now that all the wealth in the world couldn't replace the simple comfort of a mother's love. The mansion's grand rooms and expensive toys paled in comparison to the sound of genuine laughter echoing through the halls. The family was learning that true healing didn't come from material comfort, but from the patient rebuilding of trust and love. Each day brought new challenges, but also new opportunities for connection and understanding. As summer arrived, the estate's gardens burst with colorful blooms, mirroring the transformation within the family. On a warm afternoon, they gathered on the sprawling back patio, sharing a meal together. The scene was different from their first awkward encounters, now filled with genuine smiles and comfortable silence. Ava, who had once shrunk from Amelia's touch, now sat close to her mother, occasionally stealing glances at her with a hint of a smile. "Can you pass the lemonade, Mom?" she asked softly, the word Mom still new on her lips, but growing more natural each day. Amelia's heart swelled as she handed the pitcher to her daughter. She watched as both twins interacted with Theodore, their relationship with him evolving into something more authentic. He was no longer trying to buy their love with expensive gifts, but had learned to give them what they truly needed, his time and understanding. "Remember when we first met?" Aidan asked, looking between Amelia and Theodore. Everything felt so weird and scary. Theodore nodded, his eyes reflecting both regret and hope. "We've all learned a lot since then, haven't we?" "We sure have." Amelia agreed, reaching out to hold both twins' hands. "We learned that being a family isn't about where you live or what you have. It's about being there for each other, through good times and bad." The pain of the past hadn't disappeared completely. It had transformed into wisdom. The scars remained, but they no longer defined their relationships. Instead, they served as reminders of how far they'd come and how much stronger they were together. Looking at her children, Amelia saw not just who they were, but who they could become. Aidan, with his sensitive heart and quick understanding. Ava, whose quiet strength had finally found its voice. And Theodore, who had learned that love couldn't be bought, only earned through patience and understanding. They sat together as the sun began to set, a family rebuilt from broken pieces. Their future stretched before them, not perfect, but filled with possibility. The wounds of separation had healed into bonds of connection, proving that love, when given time and nurturing, could overcome even the deepest hurts. "We're home," Ava whispered, speaking for all of them. And in those simple words, the journey of their healing was complete. Thank you for being here. If something in this story stayed with you, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe, and tomorrow I'll bring you another story crafted with heart.